Scott Scher, thanks very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, David? Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Listen, I always like to talk to security professionals. You know, the journey always fascinates me because people have such diverse backgrounds, and I teach cyber ethical hacking in the college space now, and it's really interesting because they all want to get into the cyberspace, but not all of them want to make the investment. And so,
Yeah.
so let's talk about a bit about that. You made the investment, so let's talk a bit about
Yes.
the. Let's talk about your journey a bit to kind of warm up a palate.
Yeah, for sure. And for anyone that maybe listens to other stuff that I've said or anything like that, they've heard it or know me. I'm one of the few I think that I kind of run into, and I think this is changing now, right, as the industry, particularly in cyber for sure, but Intel, as it's becoming more and more wanted and kind of seeing the value, and people are going into it on purpose. I'm one of the people who usually you hear people say, hey, I kind of fell into cyber, or I ended up on the CTI team through this whole journey and got there. I Fortunately, I had the ability. I ended up taking a handful of years off before I decided to go to university, which really gave me time to figure out what I wanted to do. And some of that experience drove me towards cyber. I was living for a little bit without some modern convenience and realized the importance of being able to protect the infrastructure and the security that we have from a societal
Scott,
space.
do you mind if I double click on what you just said?
Sure. Yeah.
Because you go through it so quickly.
Yep.
A lot of people. This is another thing a lot of people talk about but don't ever do.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what does
Uh,
that mean?
for sure. Yeah. What that means. So yeah, sometimes I like to gloss over it because I don't want to all this crazy story in the background. But
But that's
uh,
what Scott. That's what people want. People want authenticity. They want stories. That so if you can expand on it, it'd be great.
absolutely. So after, high school and kind of working in a normal, construction and doing this, not really knowing what I wanted to do, got an opportunity to go and kind of move across the country and live on a homestead, really. And the cool part of it was the people that I linked up with, they were pretty much running a self-sufficient 15-acre homestead where everything was growing their own food, taking care of livestock, kind of really doing everything in house, pretty much off grid completely. I mean, we have some generators and things like that to run equipment, and the occasional movie at the end of the night to just make sure you don't go crazy. But yeah, I lived for about 4 years or so, give or take, really kind of living that homestead kind of lifestyle where we were digging holes every day, we were growing food, really that kind of opposite of what my peers and family and the rest of the world were doing at the 2010 to 2013 2014 time period of social media on the computer, on all these things where that was really exploding. I kind of took a step back and said, hey, I don't think I want to be a part of this. I don't think I really like where this may end up. And I think maybe I was right in thinking that, as we've seen things develop recently. But that's really kind of what drove me. And then it was, hey, is this really sustainable for the next 40, 50 years? I was 20 in my early 20s. Was it really something I could do forever? And then it was, well, I kind of left because, I didn't really like how everything was going. Have I really done anything to improve that? Yes, for myself, I have. I've removed myself. But, that's what really drove me to say, hey, I could go do this cyber thing. And this was kind of now 2013, 2014, which is when it was kind of exploding, right? You had the Google incident, the Sony incident. You had all these things where cyber was really kind of getting the forefront. So I was really, and I'll say lucky, right? I have a formula for what I think luck really is, right? It's timing and opportunity and the ability to capitalize on both of those, right? I was very fortunate to, at the time when I made this
Yeah,
decision,
Scott,
cyber was exploding.
and circumstance, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%
circumstance,
correct.
for sure.
Yeah.
And it's the ability, right? There's always going to be a component of ability in there, right? Of, hey, can you recognize that this is an opportunity you should be taking, or recognize the timing to do or don't do something? And I got fortunate that I took time off, and then when I decided to come back, it was the right time. And then in university, I had an opportunity to intern, and I interned for about 2 years with this gentleman. He was a big powerhouse in the old computer world, right? He was Dennis Hayes, the Hayes Modem Company. So if you remember when you used to have dial-up external modems to kind of go in and that terrible sound when you would pick up the phone by accident, he's the guy who okayed that sound and said, hey, I want that sound to be what people hear when they hit it. And I got to intern with him. He started a cybersecurity consulting firm that was really on the forefront. He was doing the idea of secure by design, helping companies do that before secure by design became a concept that you were really talking about. And that really drove me. And then when I got into grad school and was able to study policy and intelligence analysis specifically, that really drove me to then go into government work. And I was super fortunate to work with a team of, analysts who we all kind of together really built a really strong program that is still pretty much thriving today. And now we're all kind of different places and doing different things and trying to bring that methodology with us. So again, really luck, opportunity, and things I was able to kind of drive and take advantage of.
Do you think you would have done anything different looking back? Sometimes hindsight is 2020. I tell you, I get my fix of this homestead just watching these videos on YouTube of people just building this cabin in the
Yeah.
woods and it's all time lapse. That's how I get my fix. I never
Yep.
actually did that. Could you have done anything different? Do you think that maybe, uh, I'm assuming that the 4 years really gave you some clarity in terms of what you want me to
Absolutely.
do. And then also, I find a lot of people just join college too soon,
Agreed.
meaning that they don't have the mindset. They just spend 12 years in the education system and he got sped out, and now they're like again into something else. So,
Yep.
but to my original question, do you think that this was the optimal, or you could have done something different?
I mean, I think you could always do things different, right? And I think optimal, I would say yes, because it's been working and it's worked out, right? So like optimal for me and being able to do that. But I would say one, looking back, you could always do things better. And what that would be for me personally, I think choosing to dive a little bit deeper into some more technical skill sets would probably have been a wiser move. Again, I stayed away from it a little bit, particularly in education. It was, hey, I don't really enjoy coding. I didn't really love the like technical aspect of the industry. So I really focused on the policy and the strategy and the intelligence and the analytical side. But you can't really do this job without having some basic understanding. And I have the basics, right? I understand how computers work and the internet, and and I could, if I have to, which I really hope I don't get asked to do often, which is why I like being on a team, is if I have to go into logs and look at it and pull procedural data or commands and things like that, I can work my way through it. It's not going to be fun or easy for me, but that's what I would say I would really focus a little bit more on. But it's a balance because I think both skill sets are super important.
And then talk to me about how you stumbled upon, and it seems like it was directional, meaning that you stumbled upon it, but then you took direction knowing that this is what you wanted to do from a threat intel perspective. And you write this, there was the booming time where companies realized that they had to do a 360 review of what's out there. But when was it kind of that clicked in that that kind of had the first hands-on experience and decided this is great, this is what you wanted to do?
Yeah, I will say from the Intel side, I'll go from there. The rest of it, like going into cyber, I really, because I wasn't technical and had decided, right or wrong, to say I wanted to dive too deep into the technical side. I thought all I could do was policy work, right? I was like, hey, I could only do, hey, maybe I can go and advise governments, work in that space and write policy memos and do all that kind of stuff to like kind of help drive direction. And then in grad school, my first year at SIPA, the School of International Public Affairs over at Columbia, under Professor Jason Healy, really got exposed to the intelligence side of it, and really from a policy, but from a helping the warfighter and then kind of coming in that domain, just the nature of the school, like international security and that kind of space. And it was, hey, there are actually functions in intelligence that for cyber that aren't just offensive, that aren't just hey, I need to be, behind the keyboard and doing really cool work and fun stuff like that, that there is this other side of it. And that's really, to be honest, was my personal kind of one, my personality, two, my skill set and my kind of drive was really always around that side of it and the understanding and assessment piece, which is why when I was in school and particularly in undergrad, I was again fortunate enough to be in a school that offered me an opportunity to do an interdisciplinary degree rather than having to choose one subject that I had to focus in on. And because I was a little bit older, I really knew what I wanted to do, and I formed my idea around understanding computers, informatics, how the business and computers work together, and then really understanding political science, public policy, international relations, that kind of piece, on top of doing a lot of research and psychology work to kind of round out. Because my understanding was, hey, these are people behind all of these incidents, right? When we talk about attribution, we talk about all that stuff. These are human beings doing a thing, right? And it's, can you understand why they're doing what they're doing, their motivation, their capabilities, the opportunities to do when we start talking about threat from the more technical side. And that's really what drove me. And when I got the opportunity in grad school to see that that's what true intelligence really is, and that's something I've talked about, right? Like coming at it from the intelligence first perspective. That's really what I kind of hone in on is understanding the adversary, understanding the intent, the people, the motivations, the psychology behind it. And that's when I got exposed to that, you could actually do that in a technical space. That's really kind of just made me go all in.
Yeah, and it's interesting because right now there seems to be an emerging area within cyber is the kind of the cyber psychology,
Yeah.
which was not even a thing. It's really amazing to see this whole industry evolving, and it's also interesting to what you just described, where there's even within the threat intel community, there's different silos, meaning and that's what people don't know, right? So when they say, when you graduate, you just know that you can do ethical hacking, you can go work as a network administrator or cybersecurity professional. But even within threat intel, there's different silos on how to do things. And so this whole coming back to this whole psychology of I guess adversaries and the psychology of cybersecurity, why do you think it's all of a sudden becoming front and center? I mean, and this is also reminds me, Scott, of other areas of life. So, for example, people that do stock market trading, a lot of it is to do with they're saying that the underlying movement in the stock market is really the human element
Human
associated
behavior.
with it.
Yep.
Human behavior.
Absolutely.
So yeah, there's
Yep.
algorithmic, but even the algorithms are simulating
Yep.
human behavior.
Yeah.
And I would say that even LLMs now, they're models on human behavior. So, how this whole thing came about? Where do you think the kind of the turning point and why is this whole even a thing right now?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good question. I think that, you know, story that you kind of told there, right? Like even in a what you would consider a very technical, like financial market kind of space of, hey, it's really still being driven by human behavior, right? And I think the answer to that, or at least a simple version of that, is right. We live we live in a world of people, right? We live in a world where decisions are made by people, things are driven by people, people are the center of everything that we interact with and do. And technology is really a reflection of that. I think there are times when the technology kind of goes past the human piece and that it becomes very technical and hard and disjointed from it. But as the technology evolves, as we evolve in our integration and use of it, it becomes more human, right? That's why even we call LLMs artificial intelligence, right? It's, hey, can we make something that can talk to you? Can we make something that can feel alive, even if it isn't? And I think that's just nature of human beings wanting to be social, wanting to be interactive with each other. And the more we integrate technology, I think the more that's going to become reflective of that. Why it is becoming front and center now, I think it's just because of maturity. It would really be my kind of piece there is we've now been living with technology for so long. We've been understanding it, integrating it, using it. And that part of that psychology just, I think, naturally comes out of it as we've evolved across time with it. And I think it's gotten that front stage because people are starting to realize that the human is actually pretty critical. As much as you may be able to replace them with a piece of technology, which happens in every sector and has since technological revolutions, they are always an augment. It is never a complete removal.
So do you think, Scott, that the adversaries on the other side are also modeling the human behavior or of a defender? So
100%.
it's like it works both ways, kind of thing.
Absolutely. And I think the threat actor has and typically is and probably will continue to be more innovative, had more freedom of the ability to do this, and is doing it much quicker and faster. And they're a little bit better at sharing that information with each other, or at least willingness to do so. So I think it's been happening for a long time, right? Social engineering as a
I was
major
I was about to say, Scott, you
there,
beat
right?
me
Yeah,
to it.
of course. Yep. Social engineering as a major component of how threats unfold is the epitome of that idea, right? It's you could have groups like the COM, and you could have the offshoots of Scattered Spider and all of these organizations that can do something with not being super technical or not doing highly advanced custom tooling. They are doing this by understanding how people respond to actions, how what motivates people to want to help you, and they do a really good job of understanding that. Maybe sometimes better than even we do as defenders, because I think the space has evolved in such a technical, driver. Right? There's the cybersecurity. It's a piece of IT that's come out of information security and like all the different evolutions of it, and we sometimes still only look at it from a technical perspective. I think that is changing pretty rapidly to the point of where we kind of got with this conversation of where the psychology, where the person element is coming more front and center, is that it's not just technology. But I think the threat actor understood that a long time ago, right? So yeah, I think we're both learning, but I think they definitely learn from us. And we know that from researching, right?
And this is also another area where you always have to get your skill set enhanced and improved over time.
Yep.
Nothing can stand still. And coming back to this whole profession, what, in your opinion, again, what makes a good threat intel analyst? Like, what are the kind of the pillars, the foundational knowledge, skill set, attributes, all of the above that. And then when did you know that you were good at it? Like, was there like turning points? I know that people in the career, they do things and kind of the only, I guess, in hindsight, they knew there was something clicked and they was the right place and the right time. And maybe there's kind of two-part question. One is the
Sure.
skill set, and the other one is when did you know it was it for you?
Yeah. I think I'm going to try to answer the second question first and then go over, because I think it's going to be a shorter answer, right? It's still happening, right? It's still every day. Oh, this is what I enjoy, and it's something that I'm good at. And I only say I'm good at it because I've fortunately have been successful, and a lot of that is by other people being on my team and helping me and developing me. And it's
And
more of
Scott,
a
I guess one attribute is being humble. I guess that's the first one.
sure. Yes, I think naturally we are, just because of the nature of this, is the fact that everything's always changing. We're being forced to learn at all times. Is I think we very quickly realize that we don't know everything and that we need other people to kind of help bring that together. So I would say, in terms of attributes, circle back. I'll just bounce around and answer all this a little chaotically, but a big attribute should be cooperation, teamwork, right? This is, and I think of all of the subsets of our industry, intelligence is the most critical to being a team sport. And I really think that is the key, right? Having those other analysts on your team, because one of the, again, attributes that you really need is the ability to challenge assumptions, challenge bias, to be able to, one, be in an environment that allows you to do that, right? To feel comfortable, to feel, on par with your peers that are there, to say, hey, I can challenge your assessment. Or why did you think this? Can you sit and, and go through, logical kind of discussions, right? The devil's advocate, or, alternating competing hypotheses, all these different structured analytic techniques that we as analysts use, and then do that from a space where you're not being the guy in the room who just always argues, which my fellow teammates will tell you is usually me, right? And but I always do it from I'm not just arguing for the sake of arguing. I'm arguing for the sake of making our judgment more accurate, or trying to make sure that we're getting to the right answer. And because of that, I will willingly argue something that I don't agree with, right? I will take off, the opposite position. A lot of that comes from like a debate kind of style, right? Like sometimes you have to, you're told what to argue against, and whether you personally agree with it or not is not completely irrelevant, but in order to understand both sides, you need to be able to communicate both sides' arguments. So I've always, which is, again, now we talk to the other half of this question, like when did I know this was something I was good at, and skill sets and things like that, is those are things that I kind of did naturally, just in wanting to understand how arguments work, or understand a particular point of view, or an ideology, or whatever it might be. It's, if I don't also understand the counter to it, then how do I really know that what I believe or what I think and feel is accurate or right if I don't know what the opposite of that is? And to know what the opposite is, I need to be able to then articulate their argument too. And I think that helps with bridging divides when there are on different sides, being able to understand both point of views and be able to see it from both sides.
And I would love to walk me, if you can, through like a day in the life. And if you can, just have some stories, because I know, I'm sure you get lots of stories, and maybe you can scrub some of the details.
Sure.
But it's really a lot of, the way I imagine it is that you sit down and you review a bunch of data, and then you're trying to pull the thread on
Yep.
different things, and it's a lot of trial and error, just like any other cybersecurity professionals, where you look at the breadcrumbs of the evidence, and then you're trying to figure out of that, put the pieces of the puzzle together. And a lot of it is a lot of grunt work. There's a lot of
Oh,
areas where
completely.
but every once in a while you come across like, you strike, and
Yeah,
I guess keeps you going to, for the next level, right?
for sure. Yeah, I'm a sports player. I played sports most of my life growing up. A sport I didn't really play or do much on is golf. However, every once in a while, I've gotten on a golf course and played. And I would say it's similar to that. Is you whack at the ball and you hit dirt and it goes all over the place, and it's terrible for 17 of the holes, and then you get one shot where it's like whoo, and it just looks nice, or it feels good, or it's, when you're swinging a baseball bat and you hear the sound of, a hit that's really good. Or, I never really could hit. I was a pitcher, but like you get those kind of like movements on it, and it just feels right, and you're like, what, I want to do this one more time. And it's totally like that, right? A lot of your work on a day-to-day basis is, it's reading reports. So a lot of my job all day long is reading news articles, it's reading vendor reports, it's reading blog posts, it's reading other things that other analysts are putting out, research, all of these things. So it's a lot of like long form reading. It's a lot of writing, but it's also a lot of, dealing with data as well, right? It's, hey, here's all these disparate pieces of information that we've collected, right? That you get from all your vendors. We kind of look at it as more of a collection source than anything else, and then being able to put that together. And it's really, that is the piece where it's, hey, skill sets that you need to be able to see patterns if you can, right? You need to be able to, but in a way that isn't biased by wanting to see a pattern.
Is that
Uh,
like a beautiful mind kind of thing, Scott, where you're
yeah, if we, yeah, it's looking at all there. It's the chalkboard with all the red strings and who's circling over here with the question mark and what's going on, and it is, and it's being able to say, hey, I looked at something. And that's why tooling is super important, right? Because you can't really just do this on your own as an analyst, because you can't remember everything. But it's reviewing, and it's why you need this really sound process on what do you do when you collect information, when you collect data. How do you analyze it and process it to turn it into intelligence? And what that, and having that process is, hey, I read or on so and so threat actor 6 months ago. I processed it. I have all of the relevant technical and contextual information about who this threat actor is in all of those reports in, say, a threat intelligence platform or a workbench or somewhere where you can kind of really do that correlation work and put all that data in there. And then in 6 months, you see something in your environment and you're now collecting that and you put that in there, and through tooling, through your analytic process, you're able to make those connections and say, oh, this same tool was mentioned in this report over here 6 months ago, and it's also mentioned in this other report from 2 years ago, and it was also seen in an incident here. And then you can start collecting those dots, and you could start saying, hey, maybe this is the same activity, right?
Can you give me
It's
an
always hard to.
example, Scott, like of from your past, like how you come across, maybe you were given a task and then you had to analyze, and then it was something there that you come across. I would love to hear tangible stories, and maybe that will solidify the experience of what you do.
Yeah. And this is incident kind of support, right? Incident response support. That's really a critical piece of what the Intel teams do. Is there were times when working on an organization was dealing with an incident, we were dealing with something, and we were seeing activity, and you're taking that technical data, you're taking, the logs, you're taking, how the incident unfolded across, the kill chain, map to MITRE. And, these frameworks are why they're so important is we're able to take those MITRE steps and, across the kill chain and compare them to analysis work that we had done in the past on, threat actors on a, I'm not going to say which threat actor or anything like that, but like on a threat actor that was known, it was, had been reported on, and we had seen similar activity, and we were able to do that mapping to some level of confidence. It was probably, I don't remember the exact confidence levels from it, but it was, at, that moderate confidence to say, hey, we have enough overlap here because we built out these processes to say how much equal do we need in order to make it the same, those kind of things. And we're able to say, hey, with some level of confidence, this is likely this same threat actor that's being reported in the
And
public, and here's all
and
this
Scott, why
information
does it
about it.
matter? Why does the from an incident response perspective,
Yeah,
and why does it matter to know who the adversary is? What
yeah,
is that the first one? Is that the first aside from containing it and figure out like it? Why is it so critical?
yeah. So I would say there are a couple reasons, and it'll go across. There's incident response reasons. There's broader organizational reasons why it matters. That last piece of your question, is it first? I would say it depends on who you're asking and who's doing it. For the Intel team, it's probably the first thing we want to know, and it's the first thing we try to figure out. Now, obviously, the actions we take are always dictated by the timeliness and actionability and relevance that it is for the defense team to do their job, which is
Hmm.
containment and remediation. Uh, how we do it is kind of depends, but in terms of why it's important is it's super important because it gives you the ability to what a term that a colleague kind of drove into my head for a lot of years was the idea of a key severability point. It's where can we get ahead of the threat actor, where can we, and this could be during incident response, even more important and more so for proactive defense is if we know what a threat actor, who the threat actor is, we know how they do what they do. And threat actor loosely, right? Intrusion, steps, that kind of thing. We never
Hmm.
really maybe know the person behind the keyboard, but how this group does what they do in an environment. It allows us to get ahead of it. Hey, at this stage, they usually go after file type, or they go after this particular type of data, so we can identify it maybe before, so that we can get ahead of the remediation and prevent them from completing their actions on objectives. Or it's also useful for what do we need to investigate, what the impact of this incident could have been, where did they maybe go, what did they do, where can we look for them, and then that helps with understanding, did you get them out of the environment, right? Like, hey, do we know where they maybe went, and let's make sure they're not there anymore. What did they potentially do while in the environment. So all of those things are really important in terms of why some form of attribution, not in the industry we say big A attribution, which is like, hey, do we know it was the GRU, or do we know it was like this guy behind the keyboard, and let's indict them. And then little A attribution, which I think is more relevant and more doable for most of the private industry, is, hey, understanding that this behavior looks like this other behavior to some confidence level of degree, and that allows us to then understand what's going to happen. And that's also important for the incident responders to be able to defend properly and put new defenses in place for the future, but also for the organization to understand, I talked about it a little bit before, like intent and motivation is why is this person coming after us? Like, why are we impacted? Is this we got caught in a random phishing campaign and, this was, a pray and spray and someone clicked on something and now they're in their environment? Was this a little bit more highly reconnaissance type of like social engineering where, a threat actor, wanted to get it or decided to start targeting things across our industry and they were able to get in and they kind of understood who to impersonate to, get a password reset or whatever it might be? Was this a highly resourced criminal organization, ransomware, or, nation state who wants a particular type of data that we have? And that helps with threat modeling, understanding who you should be prioritizing in terms of, defenses in place. When you're seeing things in the headlines, which of these are actually relevant to us? These are all the key questions that the Intel team is designed to answer, and it's how we integrate across the organization to, every level, from tactical incident response, or tactical and operational, really what I would say, a little bit more so for that, because the tactical side is a little bit one-off-ish, but all the way to business strategy decision making, like M&A. Hey, are we taking on additional risk from acquiring this organization or merging with them? Do they have something going on? So it's really, I think Attribution, as difficult as it is to do, is still really important.
Yeah, it's it's interesting because it's just like if you see somebody or you notice somebody's trying to rattle your door, you like to know, you're trying to get in, right? You like to know whether it's random, somebody just passed by,
Exactly.
or they're after your house because they know exactly what something is inside your house that they want, and there's somebody behind it. So it's the same action, really,
Yep.
rattling of your front door knob, but the consequences of the two different scenarios is very vast, like in terms of what action you should take. And so I guess I'm assuming on the other side, is it always that they have the same kind of modus operandi in terms of how they do things, or do they also change over time? Or are they aware they're being profiled and then they're trying to throw in like, a wrench into, or do things? Because I'm not talking about like mom and pop shop. I'm talking about
Yep.
the nation state. Are one state is impersonating another state, like in terms of how they do things to make it look like this. We can go into a rabbit hole right there.
For sure. Yep.
You know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is an important question to talk about, right? It's one of the arguments that a lot of people in the industry say, hey, attribution isn't useful or attribution is too challenging, all because of that. And the very simple answer to all of those components of your question is yes, right? So, like, all of that is possible, probable, likely, but it is also, uh, yes, but also they're people, right? Do they always do the same modus operandi? Do they always use the exact same tools, the exact same infrastructure? No, but they reuse anything that they can reuse because it's easier. People also make mistakes a lot of times, right? A lot of what we've discovered about threat actors is, because of operational security failures. There's a lot of things where it's, they just reuse the same infrastructure for 7 different campaigns over 10 years. And now we figured out who you are from like the story before. The answer is yes. Do they also change? For sure, right? Sometimes, depending on the threat actor, and this is something that we add into our analysis and assessment kind of process in understanding the level of threat someone might cause, is what is their technical sophistication and what is their ability to adapt. And sometimes that ability to adapt could be during an incident, right? Like there are times and I've seen, hey, threat actor gains access to an environment, and during their attack chain, adver- defenders are trying to stop them, and they are on the fly changing the way that they do things in order to prevent being detected. And that is challenging, right? But it's also why intent is so important, and understanding attribution, understanding who it is. To your point, like from, hey, our nation states potentially impersonating each other, things like that, right? Like a false flag kind of thing is kind of what you'd call it. Has that happened? Sure. Do we know 100% every time it happens? No, but in understanding who these threat actors are, and when I say threat actors now, I'm talking a little bit more bigger A attribution of, hey, if this is a nation state, these are organizations that have a mission, that have a vision for their agency, that have policy and doctrine that tells them what they should be doing. And if you understand who that is, then you can say, oh, nation state, whoever, they have a high economic incentive and priority to go after a particular organization. Or, hey, they have the political savvy to say, hey, we can have better deniability, or we can cause more international chaos or strained relations between nations if we look like we do something that is typical of a different nation state. And are they aware that they're being profiled? For sure, right? Like they read the same news we read. They read the same vendor reporting, right? Sometimes, people comment on posts and things like, oh, why did you put out this report? Now the China, like Salt Typhoon knows that you figured this piece of their component out. It's yes, but like that's how we share with each other. And things that people in our industry talk about a lot is, hey, maybe we don't actually know who the most sophisticated of nation state threat actors are because they're sophisticated. We probably haven't discovered them. It's all these other groups that we have discovered. So why not put it out there what they're doing and all that kind of stuff? It's better for the defenders to be able to know. But they're changing those things, and then it's really about, do they have the technical capability to do that? Do they have the motivation and intent to do so as well?
Yeah, and it's interesting. All you have to do is go on X and Twitter, go
Yeah,
into that rabbit
everything's
hole.
out
I
there.
mean,
Yep.
everything's
I
out
mean, they can go to
there.
the MITRE, right? Like they can go to the MITRE website and pull down the MITRE mappings that I do for them too. And we've seen that, right? We saw threat actors go after Microsoft's like research team in order to find out what they, and the only thing they targeted was information that they have on how they operate. That's all they wanted. So do we know that they go? Yeah. Not only do we know that they read the public stuff, but they go out looking for it.
So how do you get an edge then? It seems like it's pretty now. Everything's out in the open. Is level playing field. This really,
Yeah.
it's just, and I guess depending on the time of the month or whatever, one team is better than the other until you get hacked, or and then you get pawned, and then all that stuff is out there, and you can see it. I mean, there's just so much stuff out there, from data perspective, right? It's just so
Yep.
endless, and it keeps growing and growing and growing. I mean, there's repositories, endless repositories, I guess, out there for almost anything, right? So how do you get a competitive edge from let's say you wanted to build a world-class CTI team. Like where do you go about this? I mean, there's just so much to do and so much like to gather and get the talent and companies trying to do that, right? Companies
Yep.
and our defense system is growing. I mean, I don't know what the unit is that does all our threat intel in the armed forces and the DHS, but it's quite substantial for sure.
Yeah. The answer is it. I think it really comes down to process, right? How do you get that competitive edge, that comparative advantage over, I say, over the adversary, right? I don't think we're competing with each
Process,
other, right?
people, technology. I guess it's always boils down to that.
Always. It will always be those three things, right? And but it's not just, which I think happens sometimes, is people think, okay, you have process and you have people and you have technology, and that there are three individual components, right? Another thing that other people much smarter than me in the industry have been talking about, systems thinking, right? Is you have to look at those three pieces as one unit, right? It's a team sport, right? As I talked about earlier, is you have to integrate process technology with the people who are using it. And the people need to be bought in on the process, which is also part of it. In terms of building that team, right? Like building that process out, it's having the understanding of what's needed, having strong methodology, turning, and I would say back to one of the very first things we talked about, right? Like what could I have done better in the future, right? In the past to have helped me now is part of the difference between qualitative and quantitative. And a lot of my strategic expertise is usually more qualitative assessments. However, that is always being grounded in something that with colleagues that I've built in the past is how can we quantify a qualitative assessment? And I know that, and that can be subjective and hard, but trying to make the art grounded in some type of analytical science as much as possible, right? I think as Intel analysts, we should be looking at ourselves really as logic uh, professionals. That's kind of where I think my biggest skill set and then training for a lot of this is has been really more in the critical thinking or the scientific side of what philosophy would be, right? These thinkers of how do you break down what you are looking at into sub elements? How do you understand what it's built? And all of these techniques that we use, those structured analytic techniques, all kind of come out of that kind of very, very ancient science. And that's what's I think really important, and that's what gives you the advantages because now you're collecting, right? As we said, there's a plethora of information out there, and sometimes you can over collect, you can under collect, but it's really more about what are you doing with your collections, and that's where the process, the people, the technology comes into place. Are you getting that? Are you doing your collections? Are you pulling valid sources, reliable, and are you doing that? Are you understanding what is reliable? Are you rating it? Are you taking all that information and processing it and turning it into something that is contextual and actionable and then relevant and timely for your organization or your defense, whatever it is that you're supporting? And that is where you get that advantage because that's how you're able to do what I gave an example to earlier and alluded to, which is can you have spare pieces of intelligence, spare information and data, and be able to make that connection to it, something new that you've just pulled in. If you're not doing sound analytic process, then you're never going to be able to do that. You're going to just be getting information and looking at it and saying, oh, okay, this isn't relevant now. Bye. And you move on. Or it's, hey, we looked at this. This is bad IPs, or this is C2 infrastructure and it's bad today. Great. We put in something. Here's a time decay kind of block. It won't be bad in 6 weeks or something like that. It gets cycled out. Done. And then you move on. But if you see that stuff again and you haven't done the work where it's now associated with a threat actor, it's the difference between an observable and an actual indicator of compromises. It has to indicate something, right? So if it's just a list of IPs, hey, this is used by a threat actor, or this is high risk or suspicious or bad, it's how is it bad?
Yeah, I would say the companies now are shifting. They don't want more data. They don't want more systems. They just want the outcome. So I would say if you're building a CTI team, or you're building a practice, you really are not looking at just how much to collect, or they just want the outcome. And the outcome in this particular case is to, as you mentioned, if something happens, to know exactly who the adversaries are and how to mitigate that. And also trying to shift the left of boom to
Yep.
trying to figure out who are after us, and because it's a matter of time, so we better be prepared. But they don't want the feeds. They want the outcome of the analytics of the feeds and actionable. So from all that noise, give me the top line, the three things that I need to worry about the next 30
Yep.
days.
100.
So how do you get there?
Yeah.
It's like a huge funnel, right? Like where you really want the nano things, right? The bottom line.
Yeah. And that is why, and the way I said it is over collection isn't good. And I think the industry, the organizations, everyone is starting to realize that just collecting anything and everything isn't relevant or actionable. And not being relevant and actionable and the oversaturation causes timeliness to just decrease quite a bit as well, right? Because you're sifting through that big funnel. So I think one, it's just an understanding of what is actually important from an organization. I think the integration of intelligence has kind of really pushed that forward. That idea of left of boom, right? Like proactive action is really where the CTI team is utilized most effectively and efficiently. That is what CTI should be focused on. CTI shouldn't be as focused on direct response type work, right? We definitely play a role in there and are important, as we've talked about. But we really need to be, deployed and utilized in a fashion to get ahead of threats. And that's what all that analytic work, right? The idea of, hey, sometimes people are like, hey, you guys are doing too much analysis. It's not fast enough. We're in the middle of an incident. We can know something right now. It's all that analytic work that we are doing should be done way before an incident ever happens, right? And that's what we talked about with that process is we've gone through analyzing everything that we're pulling in and collecting. And it's really that source efficacy. It's really going through your sources and putting, a methodology like an admiralty code or which, if people aren't familiar, that's, NATO's reliability ratings for sourcing, right? It's really more of like a human thing. And it kind of built out of like, hey, is this what this person's telling me? Are they reliable? How reliable is the information? How likely, how often does this person give me something that is true, et
Scott,
cetera,
I
et
think
cetera.
I think we inherently every human has that built in when they're
Of
talking
course,
to somebody else.
talking to someone else, but when they're
Yeah,
reading or pulling information, not always, right?
not
So
always.
building that, and there's, all this methodology, and there's Admiralty Code is one. There's one that journalists use that I've actually kind of been reviewing recently. I forget the name of it, but they use the same thing for source validation, right? There's a lot of good overlap between how CTI should be doing like investigative work and like writing and understanding itself that they can pull from journalists as well. So there's a lot of programs around that. So what you should be doing is, right, you're understanding, hey, yes, I have 1,000 sources that I could choose from. Let me actually review what's in these, look at them, see what value I get. And then that's when we start talking about metrics and valuability is when you're tying, hey, these sources I've collected from these sources have driven these outputs, right? And that could be an intelligence product. That could be, hey, we needed to send new defensive, procedural data to the defense team so they could put new detections in the SIM or whatever it might be, right? Tools. So tying your source to action, super valuable, right? Because now not only can you say, hey, I've done an action because you're tracking it, but you can also say these are the top 10 sources we use because we use them all the time for stuff because they're driving good action and giving us reliable information. So that is how we get there. But in terms of some of the other work there, right, in how do we deal with this, threat feed actionability outputs, is that is really where the CTI team comes into place. Is our job is to go through all this analytic work, take all this disparate information, and give you something that is relevant, actionable, and timely, right? And I think the two most important pieces of that are relevant and actionable, right? If it's not relevant to an organization, they can't do anything with it. Doesn't matter how fast you get it to them. But that piece of what I mean actionable, and it's something that I think the CTI industry is leaning a little bit more towards, and it's one of those things where it's gotten a little bit because of maybe traditional intelligence practices, things like that, where the intel team doesn't typically, or an intel team has not historically been someone that makes recommendations per se. We don't
Hmm.
typically tell a decision maker, here's 5 things you can do. You should really do number 3. We usually say, here's everything you need to know, pros and cons, impacts, consequences, etc., of these 5 options. Now go make a decision based on that. In the enterprise world, particularly in CTI, and then the more you're dealing with technical and tactical, operational teams, they want to know what to do. And it's not so much from a, hey, I'm your boss, or, like
Hmm.
you got, I'm auditing you as a function from the Intel team. We don't want to be that. But it's more of a, hey, we're going to write this big, or we're going to create this attack flow, or we're going to do something that's usable for you. And then we're going to tell you how to use it, or we're going to recommend how you should or could use it. And that's really what it comes down to, saying, hey, this is an action you could take from this report. A lot of the report, as an example, right? I write these threat actor profiles. They are long form written reports with a lot of like operational data in there as well. So it's actually relevant for multiple stakeholders. But the very top piece, which is in every one as the template, is there's an entire, this team can use this product to do these things. Here are the key decisions that you can make based on this product for which team you are. And that's the SOC, that's the incident response team, that's the detection engineer, that's the executives and leadership structure. And I have that all written completely out that says, here's your key items, here's the key pieces of information in this report that will drive those actions and help inform you. So it's really about helping, guiding teams to understand how to use the intelligence you're doing. Otherwise, you're just writing reports for other analysts, right? And I read it. Yes, I like
That's
that, but that's not really useful for the organization.
that's the TLDR section. Too
Yeah.
long didn't
Yep.
read. So how do you measure effectiveness then? Meaning, or success criteria, or You're spending X million of dollars on a team or you outsource that function. How do you know that they're doing their job? How you talk about quantifications, right? How do you quantify the success of all that money that you put in to potentially reduce the risk to the organization? How do you quantify that?
Yeah, I think that is right now the question that is being asked across the industry. And if I had the full awesome solution, I'd be pushing it and trying to capitalize on it or give
So,
it out, you
so
know?
Scott, maybe we should brainstorm on what that is, and
Yeah,
maybe we
we
can come
should.
up with something.
What I will say is there's been a lot of really good work that has come out of the cybersecurity maturity model, the CTI maturity model that's been recently published. Version, I think they're 1.2 now is the most current version. I forget the versioning number, but the most recent update to the CTI CMM is there's an entire appendix with metrics in there. So that is, and they've done some really great work on how to answer this exact question, because it's what everyone's been kind of asking is how do you make that ROI? How do you draw that straight line from a CTI report or action or function to hey, we saved money, or hey, we're spending all this money, where's the value? And there are a lot of operational and metrics. Hey, can you measure the amount of detections that are being put in place that are being driven directly by intelligence processing? Can you derive intelligence led penetration testing, intelligence led threat hunting, which is things that are now being put into regulations like DORA and things like that, where they want to see the idea of a threat informed defense, which is really, I think, if you want to start talking about ROI, is have you integrated and pushed intel across the organization to help it drive proactive defensive actions, and you can monitor and track all that. Then the other component of tracking that, right, is it's not just we put detections in because the intel team told us to put detections in, right? That is, sure, that's a measure you can count, and maybe it's valuable, maybe it isn't. The next piece of that, which is also something that I think is important for CTI and the defenders to understand, is that because we're in this together, the best way to push ourselves together is making sure that the intelligence we're providing is creating detections that are actually being alerted on. Is now you need to monitor that as well. Well, which detections are actually things that we're getting alerts for, which means we're investigating whether it's a true positive or not, right? Like it's something that is triggering an action that is then needs to be resolved, which could be a true threat, which means it's something we need to take a look at, and that's what you want to be tracking, because then now it's a circle, right? It's a loop. It's not just the intel team is driving, telling you to go do things. We've now said, hey, you're seeing mostly Trojan type activity, malware impacting our organization. We're constantly giving you stuff about ransomware. If that's not what you're seeing the most of, why do we keep giving you ransomware reports, right? We need to give you reports on how Trojans are operating, their URL rules, their about hashes, right? Like we've been giving you things about their functionality and what they're doing, because those are the types of alerts that you're seeing. And now we can put those detections in place, and you can start mapping that stuff together so that it is the what is being seen impacting the environment is driving the intelligence collection and processing work, and the intelligence and processing work is informing and driving the proactive defensive steps taken for that.
And now I guess the industries also start utilizing AI, and I have to bring
Yep,
this up as
of course.
it's kind of the next frontier, and we see Palantir being going crazy, valuation due to the fact that
Yep.
the promise of having this automated AI engine that would be able to do all of that in a high quality fashion. Where do you see the industry going in that particular section for the CTI team to be utilizing? Because AI is really good as detecting patterns, sifting through a massive amount of data. I guess there's some pieces are missing, and there's still, I would say, areas where it makes mistakes, right? Or when I say either false positive or false negative, meaning it doesn't detect things that it should be
Yep.
detected, or detect things that that are not really there. From your experience, and what's your opinion how the AI is going to be integrated into this industry, in this space?
Yeah. That's a second like pivotal question that's being asked right now, right? AI is everywhere, and it's better or worse, it is being pushed by everybody to be used, right? My organization has a mandate on wanting to use AI in every aspect of the organization. Of hey, we are bought in on this. We want to make sure our employees are using it, and we want you to find use cases for it. So this is happening whether we want it to or not. And I think I think overall it's a good thing, right? Like most technology, it is going to be an augment to doing our jobs better, and our jobs, everyone's jobs. But in CTI, right? I think there are a lot of elements where it is useful, and I would be willing to go out and say that a lot of the functionality has been happening for a long time. We maybe didn't call it AI, we called it automation. We called it some different things. It wasn't maybe an LLM, but it was still being driven by
Machine
patterns,
learning,
machine learning,
standard
all
deviation.
these, right? Yeah, all these things, and there are tools that have been doing this for a long time, right? Like you can go and pull up a tool, and it will do pattern tracking. It'll do that, right? And it's hopefully getting better, and I think it is getting better. What I would say is that it is, as an augment, is one key thing that I think is really important to understand about CTI that maybe outside of intelligence professionals maybe isn't as understood is we don't really do prediction per se. And what I mean by that is we're not. This isn't. I don't think we're going to end up in Minority Report and where hey, because some person did a thing 20 years ago in school, they made a comment that means they're going to be a cyber criminal in their adult life, and then we're going to find out before, and we're going to be able to stop all attacks from happening before it happens. I don't think that's going to happen, or at least not in the near term. But I do think what it can help with is to some of the conversations that we talked about before, right? We have all of this information that we have access to. There's maybe too much, but the AI can sift through that. AI, like I am using it, right? I'll give stories, right? Like how we're using it on the team, right? We're using it to help summarize reports. I know AI is not always the best at that, but some of the models out there, and if you're building them, the other thing is how these models are being trained. I think CTI, and I know a lot of researchers are already doing this, but I think in terms of what CTI AI should be looking at is someone needs to be building these models that are trained on CTI, on like real CTI data, reports, all that kind of stuff. Because if you just give it to ChatGPT or just Copilot or whoever, they're not as good at like pulling out the intelligence piece, right? They'll give you a general summary. Like they're not going to do what the Intel analyst does. But the better we can train them, the more likely that is. But it's also, right, using it to, and if they understand, right, if they could say, hey, here's all the MITRE data, here's what report, and what you should be doing is using your internal reporting so you actually know that it is work that you value and think is relevant, right? Because you can get vendor reporting, anything that is maybe not relevant to your organization. The quality varies depending on which analyst is writing it from that organization, per organization, all these different things. And saying, hey, I, as an Intel analyst, I've created a really strong Intel output, at least my opinion of what a strong Intel output is for my organization, et cetera, and train it on that. Now you can say, hey, here's what a procedure looks like when we start talking about tactics, techniques, and procedures. Now go through all of these reports and just pull that data out. Don't do anything with it, but just give it to me. Then maybe you can get to the point where you're saying, hey, what is this data kind of look like? What is it kind of indicating? All those kind of things. And where I think it will really end up is very much as an augment of, hey, and maybe this is a good thing for us or not, but I think the sizes of teams might decrease. I think it will come to a point, and this will be across industries, of the highest performers in those industries are always going to be valuable and needed, and then I think it's going to be harder for lower, less skilled, or I don't really like to say it that way because I don't mean less skilled people who it's going to cut down that entry level. It's going to cut down that barrier, even though you need that in order to train the people who are good at it. Like, I don't know where all these people are like, oh, we're going to just AI the entry level roles. It's like, well, then how are you going to have senior roles? Because there's not going to be anybody who knows how to do the entry level stuff, right? So, like, I don't really understand that pipeline. But what it will be able to do is it will be able to allow an organization to say, hey, maybe we don't have the monetary resources to have a team of 20 analysts, which is pretty much everywhere, because I've never been on a team that was more than like 5 people. But hey, maybe with those 5 people, we can take 5 really good analysts, and we can triple, quadruple their ability to do the job, because now, hey, we can have AI correlate, we can AI put things together, and you can have an analyst go in and review that, right? Basically treating AI as a entry junior level employee, saying, hey, we've taught you how to do this function. We want you to go put it together. And then you need someone who actually knows how these systems work, who actually understands what this output should be and look like, to be able to go in and say, okay, is this accurate? And then be able to use that to then inform your actual intelligence work, right? Like you can have all this tactical data and you can put it in, and what it will do is it will allow you as an analyst to take that and say, what does this mean, right? Because that's really what I think intelligence, does, right? Is provides that context to some of what we talked about before, like being able to understand human behavior, being able to understand the psychology or the intent and motivation behind why people are doing things, and be able to make those connections. As great as AI might be in understanding that, I don't know if it's going to get to the point where it can make those human understanding that we do.
Yeah, and maybe that would enhance the ability for some of the smaller companies to implement. Because right now it's kind of the domain for the Fortune
Yep.
1000, I would say. But there's still a need for SMBs and out there to have an understanding of what's going out there. And maybe it's not in the level of maturity because some of them still don't have a two-factor authentication on there.
Yeah.
But eventually, there's a huge backbone of companies or organizations that they cannot afford a full CTI team. Maybe
Yep.
using kind of a combination of AI and the group of analysts to really go after like a larger mass of data and larger maybe slice the kind of the service to a lot of different companies. And maybe that's a business model where you should adapt. It kind of leads me kind of the last question is it kind of leads to that. How do you sell this value for the organization to the
Yeah.
board? We talked about that. It's because it is an investment. Getting a good team in place, training them, getting the effect of getting a solid understanding of what's out there and preempting. It requires heavy lifting from a resource perspective, management, and so on and so on. So how do you sell that value? And maybe it's not hard to sell value. Maybe because from my exposure to executives, they can't have enough of data.
Right.
Executives love data. They love to know what's out there. And there's even in this whole CTI team, I guess now for individuals, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's after you specifically, not the company itself. So how do you sell that value?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, right? That it doesn't really matter how good we are or how great our intelligence process is and how much good intelligence work we can do if no one's buying it, right? If no one wants it, if no one sees the value in it. One, and I've talked about this, I think, a little bit through here and in other spaces, is translating, right? We talked about how do we have metrics or how do we translate it to something that is worth the monetary investment. But then there's the buy-in investment as well that goes with that. It's translating it into what makes sense for the organization, right? And a lot of things. First off, it's integration, so it's proving value as much as, right. I think any team across any function is, can you provide and prove to your stakeholders, and at this point we're talking about executive stakeholders, right, of the fact that you do good work and building the trust in that. A lot of that, in my opinion, comes from what you're providing and the way that you're providing it. And what I mean by that is, as when this is actually an argument I had with a colleague kind of recently, of like what constitutes an assessment as from like an Intel perspective, like when you write an assessment, right? Like, hey, the CTI team assesses XYZ threat actor is a high threat to the organization. We make this assessment with moderate confidence because blah, 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 like all these kind of things that go into it. And then it's what actually needs to be in that. I think a lot of detail needs to be in that in terms of being able to get buy-in. And I think in the beginning, it's if you can prove to your stakeholder, and by proving I mean justifying, saying, hey, we're not just saying X thing is bad, so go spend $100,000 on a new security tool or whatever, like decision has to be made because of that. It's, hey, this is bad. This is why it's bad. This is how confident I am, or we as a team are, in saying this is bad, or relevant to us, or whatever the assessment is, and putting all that in there as the justification, because then that starts to build the trust. And I think trust is really important for the CTI team, particularly with all of their stakeholders, but most importantly with their executive stakeholders, of saying, hey, when I as an executive see something on CNN, or I read something on bleeping computer or whatever, I'm in my, CISO chat and another CISO messages me and says, we're being impacted by this stuff and like the whole industry is on fire. Like, what are you guys doing about it? That he can, or he or she can confidently say, hey, my Intel team is likely tracking this because I trust and see their process and know what they're doing, and that they're going to be on this. And if this is relevant to me, they're going to tell me. And like to build that takes a lot of effort because I've been in organizations where that trust doesn't exist at all. I've been in places where that trust is extremely, high fidelity, and it's, hey, they don't even need to come and talk to us. They just know, hey, the Intel team is going to tell me everything I need to know, and I'm confident in that. And then I've been places where it's kind of like in the middle, where it's, hey, I know the Intel team tracks these things. Let me just, hey, did you guys see this? I got told about it. Do I need to know anything? Stand. So having all of that baked into everything that you give them all the time really helps them feel an understanding of, oh, I know exactly how you did what you did. And that's when I say coming down to process is something that you need to really build out, is building out that quantitative or qualitative assessment. Is that's auditable. And I don't just mean from regulators, I mean from anybody, right? Like if I'm making an assessment to recommend that the defense teams do a particular action and they come back and say, why? We don't think this is really a threat. I can go and I can pull up Excel sheets. I can pull up graph analysis. I can pull up, MITRE mappings. I can pull up all these things, and I can pull up the formula to the exact question mapped to the evidence that I use to support that question to say, this is why we made the decision that we made. And here's how confident we are in it based on the reliability of the information, how much information we had. And then, which is super important, is all of the gaps that we have. So here are the things that we don't know that could actually change our assessment. And putting that all down it builds trust because it's transparent.
And I'm assuming that and thank you for the detailed response. This is great, and it boils down to, again, the human element associated with it. How can we trust you that you're doing your job?
Yep, it's relationship building.
Yeah, relationship. And then when something happens, and when you got in front of that train and you were able to notify before things happen, or something happens and you have the immediate answer, you're golden, right?
Yep.
It's like money in the bank.
Yeah.
You're like, you cash
And
that.
no one typically pays attention to that, right? It's something that tends to, it's a joke we make in the industry as intelligence professionals, is no one ever hears about intelligence successes, right? Successes happen all the time. No one ever hears about it. Things were prevented, or things never even were able to realize that they were prevented because there's so much stuff going on in the background that we never even knew. But you hear about intelligence failures all the time, right? And I don't just mean us, like in the organization, like what's in the news, all these things is, oh, why didn't you predict this from happening? Because one, we don't do prediction, right? We make estimative assessments that tell us what could be based on evidence and what we know and what we don't know. But you don't really hear about that as much.
Yeah, no, totally. And then I was about to say that, that money in the bank only runs out after a while. So you almost have to have that continuously, like every once in a while. You gotta, it's almost like, let's say you're in sales, you're only good as your last month, you know.
Exactly. That's what I
So
was about to say. The same thing. It's like being on a New York sports team, right? You're only as good as the last thing that you did for us. Um,
yeah, exactly. And
but
the same goes
yeah,
for the Intel team, right? It's
for sure. Absolutely. And what I would say is, I think one of the things that's super important, and you talk kind of about sales and about that, right? And I think we've talked, the last couple questions about how do you market, how do you sell intelligence as a team and a function and all these things. I think to one of the first things we talked about, right, of skills and attributes that you need, right? Being humble is super important, I think, for any industry, for any individual, right? Like no matter how good you are as the all-star or as like the guy who's really, or, the person who's really good at what they do, you're only as good as the other people around you who are helping you be that good. So being humble is super important. But as a team, you need to be willing to highlight your success. And that's what I think the difference, right? As an individual, I always, and when I say it's a team sport, right? Like I don't, when I work on teams, we don't send, reports from a personal email. We send it from the team email. We don't say Scott assesses this or I think this. It's we think this. It's the CTI team did this. It's the CTI team's product, It's a CTI team as a whole. And that's super important. So you want to celebrate those successes. You want to say, hey, look, organization, like we did this, and you want to be able to write a cool, like you write all these cool reports about all this other stuff, write a cool success report. Hey, like we did this. You should absolutely feel confident in doing that. And the organization is going to appreciate that in some way, form, right? They're going to say, whether they really like it, but they're going to say, oh yeah, we remember you did do something really good. But the next time something bad happens, it's like, yeah, but like all these things good did happen. Like we have a record of that.
That's
That's what I
called
think is really important.
sandbagging, I think. And see if you look at that.
Yes. Yep. But yeah, so like I mean, I think right, like as a team, it's really important. You should celebrate your successes across, and you should celebrate all the people who help you do that. And that's not just your internal team, right? When we start talking about systems thinking and things that I mentioned before that others have kind of been pioneering, is this is inter team too, right? Like inter organization. This is, hey, yeah, CTI drove an action, but CTI didn't take the action. We empowered a decision maker to make a decision. We empowered a defender to defend. We empowered, incident responders to, be able to get ahead of an incident beforehand, to remediate faster. They did the hard work, right? And we want to always highlight that as well in all of our reporting, whether success in our normal intel reporting of saying, hey, this is the proactive steps that these teams took. These are the defensive mitigations that are already in place, that the organization is already doing, that prevents these things from happening, or else at least helps prevent, right? So like it's really important to also champion our collaborators and stakeholders as well. And it's a good opportunity to do that because they also don't always get that chance. As an individual, I want to step back and say, hey, don't tell anyone I did this, or we didn't really like put me or anyone in the front, like this analyst worked on that or anything like that. From both a success and a potential gap or failing or whatever it might be, it's not this person made a mistake in the assessment. It's the team, like, right, like, hey, we weren't right, and that happens all the time. A manager I had, she has this idea of like leadership through empathy, right? And one of the key things that she's put out there is the idea that, right, hey, this is, as a leader, you need to be able to, and a leader as an organization like a CTI team, I think this is really relevant for, is you need to be able to say, hey, I made this decision because of this information that I had here. It was wrong, and here's why it was wrong, or here, this new information has now changed that assessment, and then here's what we need to do moving forward.
Yeah, and this is why I love this industry. It's definitely a team sport, and it requires everyone, including anybody in the organization, actually, not just the people in cyber or
Exactly.
the IT. It requires it requires a village to get the organization to be more secure, and I love that space. Scott, we are running out of time, but it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been really amazing conversation in the space. What's the easiest way for people to get hold of you?
Yeah, the easiest way to get hold of me would be on LinkedIn. That's really the only place that I'm on. When we talked about earlier and about my journey, right? I haven't really been on social media. I never really went on that train, so I'm not on any of these places to reach me. But please connect with me on LinkedIn. Obviously, my first and last name that they hopefully have, Scott Scher. That you can, if you want to find me, I'm more than happy to connect. I'm more than happy to, talk about any of the concepts that I had here. I really just enjoy talking about CTI as like an industry and and a development and kind of a function. In any way that I could, give advice, help, or have that back and forth debate if someone, disagrees with, which I'm sure
Yeah.
there's plenty of people disagreement to go
Well,
for lots of things that I said.
Scott, people don't remember what you said, but definitely remember how you made them feel. And
Yes.
you can totally tell that you're very passionate about this industry
Thank
and
you.
what you do. And it's evident that you put in the time and investment into this. So I appreciate the time today. Looking forward to following your footsteps, and maybe we'll do this again sometime soon. In fact, maybe we'll do, if there's any incidents, and I know there are, like failures in the
Yeah.
CTI, maybe we'll go on and get on the horn and we'll analyze what those look like, and
Yeah,
maybe after
absolutely.
the fact, pros and cons. So until
Please,
then,
yeah, please,
yeah,
that'd be great. Always, anytime if you want to, talk again, whether it's live or just back and forth between us, please. And, thank you so much for having me on here and giving me like this platform to talk about stuff.
yeah,
I really very much appreciate that.
it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much. And for all who
Thank you.
joined today, stay safe online as well as offline. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you again.
Thank you.